In this tutorial, we will cover grid editing modes, separating a region at the grid, and also separating a region at transients. Alright, right now we're in absolute grid mode. I can tell because the grid box is blue. If I click hold on that, I can choose to go to relative grid mode. Now the difference is how the regions and other items behave when they snap to the grid. So I'm going to go to slip and I'm going to move this region slightly off of the beat like that. Let's hear how it sounds to the metronome. Okay, let me make it even more off to the metronome. Alright, going back to grid mode, if I hold and go to relative grid, whenever I move something it will snap to the grid but remain offset the same amount as it is here. So if I move, notice that this region is still offset, still offset. If I go to absolute grid, anytime I move a region, no matter where it is, it'll snap to the first available grid point. There it is, and subsequently it'll stay on the grid. I would say most of the time you'll use this absolute grid mode unless you have a little pickup node or something that's supposed to be a little before the grid and you want it to stay equally before the grid. Alright, there's another function that's useful that allows you to separate the region by the grid. So if you had something that was rhythmically accurate with the grid, you could separate it out and then use each of those sub-regions and create new rhythms with that. So let's try that. I've highlighted my region and I'll go up to edit and I'll say separate region and I'll say on grid. It'll separate it into 4 pieces. If I choose a pre-separate amount, it'll give me a couple samples of padding before each cut. So if you have something fading in, that might be helpful. I'll leave it at 0 milliseconds for this beat. And now you see we have 4 regions. So I could take them out and move them around the grid. Like this. We can hear this one by itself. Okay, so I could now make some new loops or a little fill with just this one. I could do something like this. I'm holding down the Option key so I can copy and paste and leave the original copy. So now we have a little fill that's based on 1/4 note worth of material. Okay, that's a pretty easy way to expand on some material you might have. Okay, I'm going to undo all of that. So that's pretty useful to be able to cut something right on the grid. However, if it's got sort of a swingy feel or there's notes that aren't all on the grid and you cut to the grid, you might not be able to copy it the way I just did and make sort of a nice fill out of it. And more importantly, you can't slow it down or speed it up like you would a Rux file, for example. I'll show you what I mean. Right now we're at the tempo that fits this loop. Let's say I wanted the same basic sound, but I wanted to slow it down. Now there's a number of ways to do that, but this is one of the ways. So I'll click on this, choose edit, separate region on grid. Now notice that I have this track set to tick based, which means it will respond to tempo changes. Since it's audio, the audio won't change. Elastic audio is off, but the regions will move relative to the tempo. So I'll go to a new tempo. I actually have a default tempo set to 80, or the manual tempo. So when I turn off the conductor, it jumps to that. Notice that my regions just separated. So I'm going to play it once at the original tempo, then I'll slow it down and see how they separate. Okay, slow down the tempo. Okay, well that's an interesting effect, but each individual region still maintained its tempo through the subdivisions. So it sounds like fast, stop, fast, stop. A better way to separate the regions and create more realistic slowing down effect, I'm going to undo that and undo my separate, is to separate at transients. So it'll find all the transients, separate them out, so it may separate even some of the in-between beats out. Let's try that. separate region at transients. Now notice there's a lot of small regions, sort of one for every note that you heard. Now when I do a tempo change, there'll be some kind of interesting silence gaps, but each hit will stay fundamentally in rhythm. Let's try that. I'll slow it down. Notice how it's split in a different pattern. Let's hear this. Okay, it's not actually stretching the audio to make it slower. It's just placing each rhythmic beat farther apart. So you can create some interesting slow down and speed up effects. Let's go back to the original tempo, and I'm going to try a speed up effect with this same idea of cutting the region up at transients. It's 109. I'll go to slower tempo. Let's make our manual tempo 120. Now the regions are actually overlapping a bit. Let's see how this sounds. Okay, that's a pretty convincing speeding up. So this concept of slicing at transients and then pushing them together to overlap is pretty effective. So there's some different ways you can use the separate region command and absolute grid mode to do different things with audio region loops.